Howdy, y'all. I'm going to read silently. Orion. Hi, Susan. How are you? It's so good to see you. Somebody's here. I'll read out loud. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to be here. It's been a day. I'm really tired. I don't know how come I'm feeling so tired. And I haven't been able to get myself to study all day. So we're going to try and get through this chapter quickly. I am hanging in there. I am really struggling with Hi, Journey 2020. How are you? It's the guidebook to sociolinguistics. I haven't really started reading yet, so I suppose I can unpost that comment. And probably even delete it, since y'all are here. And I know people like me to read out loud when they're here. This chapter introduces the field of variation research that has grown from the pioneering work of William Labov in the 1960s to become the most cohesive and dominant strand of sociolinguistics. The study of sociolinguistic variation had its roots in the tradition of dialectology practiced in Europe and North America. This involved surveys of rural communities concentrating on disappearing dialectical words and pronunciations and mapping their distribution. Until the mid-20th century, there had been no such work in urban areas, but that changed with Labov's research in New York City. The variationist strand of sociolinguistics studies the nexus of both variation and change. This chapter concentrates on sociolinguistic variation as far as possible, reserving discussion of linguistic change for the next chapter. Variation is wider than change. A feature may vary without changing, but it does not change without varying. Here we focus on three of the main social dimensions on which language varies between speakers: class, ethnicity, and gender. Chapter 8 will cover another age. Chapter 8 will cover another age, together with change. And Chapter 9 deals with region, including geographical variation. This chapter concentrates on sociolinguistic variation, reserving discussion of sociolinguistic variation. Okay. Many of the examples here are from English, reflecting the preponderance of the research. Variation analysis deals in linguistic detail, and so technical terminology will be required in this and subsequent chapters to specify the phonetics of variation and the necessary precision. Foundations, New York City, doing sociolinguistic interviews. Leibov began his doctoral research in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in 1962, aiming to investigate the English of New York City, map its social distribution, and identify how it was changing. The Lower East Side was an economically and ethnically mixed area that was broadly typical of the city as a whole. It had a cross-section of socioeconomic levels ranging from lower working class through to upper middle class. Leibov struck an early windfall. There had been a large and detailed random social survey of the area the previous year. He was able to coattail on this information and target a subsample who were native speakers of English and had lived in the area for at least 2 years. Persuading people to be interviewed, just a moment, guys. Miss Sunrise Dawn, it's good to see you again. It had a cross-section of socioeconomic levels, ranging from low working middle class through to upper middle class. Persuading people to be interviewed how often involved allaying the suspicion of strangers. That is an important element in the psychology of the residents of the Lower East Side. There's not much to catch up on, Sunrise Dawn. The ingenious pilot study. Yeah, he's out there somewhere.
I don't see him.
Orion!
There we go. Come on, puppy. Orion!
Hi. Go on inside.
Come here.
Get him a...
Right here.
Orion. Look.
Come here.
Go on inside.
Come here. Come here.
I'll be right back, y'all. The child can't put the dog away without my help.
The dog doesn't like me. I'm letting my friend gush about the fact that he got.
Nothing to be sorry for, Sunrise Dawn. Not a thing to be sorry for. Okay. The ingenious pilot study that preceded his main interviews had no difficulty getting people to talk. Okay. As a pilot study for the Lower East Side Survey, Leibov devised a creative technique of rapid and anonymous interviews to test for New York City stratification of post-vocalic R variable as in fourth floor, hypothesizing that the social rankings of department stores would be reflected in their workers' pronunciations. He chose 3 large stores that carried very different social levels of customers. Saks Fifth Avenue with a very upper-class clientele, Macy's with mid-level customers, and S. Klein. Kristen, how are you? And S. Klein with the lowest ranking. That sounds great, Kristen. We will do body doubling together. Leibov went around each of these stores asking different salespeople about the location of goods which he knew to be on the 4th floor. He would pretend not to hear the answer and get them to repeat it again emphatically. He then slipped out of sight, noted down their 4 pronunciations, with or without an R, and characteristics like gender and race, and moved on to the next person. Leibov reports that for 274 brief encounters, this took 6.5 hours, about 1.5 minutes per speaker. The study produced findings stratified similarly to the Lower East Side Survey, which followed. With 62% pronouncing at least one R, workers in Saks used more R than Macy's, who in turn used more than Klein's. You can read the detail in Chapter 2 of Leibov. Red, how are you? I got your message. We recorded it. I am almost certain we recorded it. I hope we recorded it. I know I pushed the record button. So once I get the notification that that recording has processed, I can email it to you. The Lower East Side interviews included questions on language so that little 4th floor was the pilot study that preceded his main interviews, which is kind of cool. The Lower East Side interviews included questions on language background, word and concept definitions, childhood games, pronunciation tasks, and language perceptions and attitudes. In particular, Leibov concentrated on eliciting 5 different styles of speech, with speakers paying increasing amounts of attention as they moved from style A to style D1. Increasing amounts of attention as they move from style A to style D1. A, casual conversation. B, careful conversation, which he describes as the default style of the interview, quite formal as befits a question and answer between strangers. C, reading passages with target words and sounds embedded. D, word lists of the target words' sounds. D1, minimal pairs of words whose pronunciations differ by only one sound, like pin and pen, or dock and dark, testing for R pronunciation. We will examine more closely and critique the nature of these styles in Chapter 11.1. A total of 122 speakers, nearly 2/3 of the target sample, were eventually interviewed, mostly by Leibov himself, resulting in 150 hours of recordings. You guys, I have to tell you, we are at less than, oh, now I can't remember. Let me check. Yay, you're caught up. Can you guys still hear me? We are almost at 2,600 watch hours. We should break 2,600 watch hours tonight. So that means 400 more watch hours. It is moving along slowly but surely, and I am so excited. I really can't wait. I really can't wait. A total of 122 speakers, nearly 2/3 of the target sample, were eventually interviewed, mostly by Leibov himself, resulting in 150 hours of recordings. Analyzing these speakers' language involved an innovative construct that remains still at the heart of the variationist enterprise: the sociolinguistic variable. A variable offers speakers the choice between two or more alternative linguistic forms which have the same meaning, but usually different social significances. Leibov examined the 5 main sociolinguistic variables: 3 consonants and 2 vowels, plus a 6th which proved very productive: the alternation between velar n and alveolar n in the suffix ing words like walking. In the notation, parentheses R denote a variable, slashes are the phenome, and square brackets the phonetic pronunciation. Oh, this is going to be hard. Figure 1 shows what Leibov found in New York City for the variable ing, which will be the subject of the case study later in this chapter. The graph has 3 elements which need to be understood. The vertical y-axis shows, okay, here's the, can you guys see that? I think the camera is dirty. Hold on. That's a little better. Don't I look sunnier all of a sudden? There you go. What that means, I'm not entirely sure yet. Let's find out, huh? The vertical axis shows the percentage of pronunciations that were non-standard in. If all were in, the index would be 100% completely non-standard. If all were ing, it would be 0% fully standard. The horizontal x-axis has 3 points on it, representing styles from casual through careful to be careful to see reading passage as defined earlier. Each of the 4 lines represents the pronunciations of all the speakers in one socioeconomic class. The demographic survey constructed a single socioeconomic index by combining speakers' data on scales for occupation, education, and income. This resulted in 10 socioeconomic strata, which Leibov has lumped into 4 classes. Hey, y'all. Wow, there's a lot of you here. Welcome, welcome. I hope you enjoy the textbook. Style times social stratification. The graph shows that the social style pattern of the graph therefore shows the social style pattern of the ing variable. Looking only at style A, casual speech, which is displayed on the far left of the graph, see that the index ranges from 10% in for the upper middle class, increasing through the two separate central groups, and up to the lower working class at 80%. This means that the upper middle class are almost always using ing, and the lower working class almost always in. Note also that the stratification between the four classes, shown by the vertical distance between the lines on the graph, is clear and consistent in each of the styles. No line crosses any other. All four classes are perfectly stratified in the three styles. That is, lower working class speakers always use the most of the non-standard invariants regardless of style. The upper middle class always use the most standard variants, and the other two classes position clearly in between. So here's that graph again, guys. Is it making any sense to y'all? I hope so. The slope of the lines shows the degree of style shift that each group makes from casual conversation through to the reading style, C. The upper middle class does not shift much, but then it does not have far to go from a starting point of 10% to 0. In reading style, all upper middle class speakers always produced fully standard ing pronunciations. The lower middle class and upper working class groups shift more, and the lower working class shift steeply. Starting at 80% in casual speech, they end up at only 24% in reading style pairs. This represents a shift of 56% from mostly using in casual speech to mostly using ing in reading style. Interpreting displays such as Figure 7.1 is an essential skill in understanding variationist research, so it is worth ensuring that you have followed all of the exposition. Nevertheless, there are issues over the social meaning of such styles and their stratification, which we return to in Chapter 11. Hey guys, how many of you got to see the Northern Lights last night? That was pretty exciting, wasn't it? I'm really looking forward to the possibility of seeing them tonight. You didn't get to see them? I'm sorry you didn't get to see them, Susan. The people in Seattle and Oregon are posting pictures. I didn't make it outside to see them either. I'm going to make an effort to make it outside tonight. It is shortly before dusk. Labov concluded that this was the kind of clean stratification is typical of variables that are stable in the community's speech. The other variables were less tidy, indicating that change was in progress. Labov cross-analyzed his data by gender and ethnicity, not just class, indicating how women and men and different ethnic groups tended to differ in their pronunciation. The study was pioneering on all fronts. The conception and design of the project and sample. Urban, random, comprehensive. The methodology of the sociolinguistic interview for eliciting different styles, especially casual speech. The analytical method for quantifying linguistic variation and correlating it. You didn't see him yet, Red? Orion is here, obviously, y'all. He didn't want to stay inside. So he is outside with me, attached to a leash, because I don't want to deal with him barking tonight. So he does not get run of the yard. Labov concluded that this kind of plain stratification is typical of variables that are stable in the community's speech. The other variables were less tidy, indicating that change was in progress. Oh, I already got through this. The study was pioneering on all fronts. The conception and design of the project and sample, urban, random, and comprehensive. The methodology of the sociolinguistic interview for eliciting different styles, especially casual speech. Really, Sunrise? That's amazing. The analytical method for quantifying linguistic variation and correlating with social difference, especially the construct of the sociolinguistic variable and the discovery of systematic social and stylistic structure in language. Establishing that the same linguistic variable serves to signal both social and style stratification. Labov's lucid phrase, "It may therefore be difficult to interpret any signal by itself. To distinguish, for example, a casual salesman from a careful pipe fitter." Flies in my face. Since then, there has been variationist research on a wide variety of languages. English predominates, but there is a substantial body of work on, in descending order, French, especially Quebec, Spanish and Portuguese, especially in the Americas. From the 1970s, the variationist approach. Orion, no. Come back here. Come. From the 1970s, the variationist approach quickly became dominant in North America, where there is some tendency to equate it with the whole of sociolinguistics. Variationism has its own annual conference and journal. A scan of recent journal issues shows articles on the 4 languages already mentioned, plus Arabic, Dutch, Russian, Greek, Italian, Guarani, Hebrew, Maori, and Australian Sign Language. We now turn to the remainder of this chapter to dealing with variation according to class, ethnicity, and gender. Figure 7.1 is the iconic class stratification graph of sociolinguistics, a format on which hundreds of displays in dozens of studies has been patterned. It shows the clean stratification of sociolinguistic variation by class in New York City. Shows clean stratification of sociolinguistic variation by class in New York City and the class's shared pursuit of the standard variant across the style spectrum. The figure presents the measurement of language variability in a luminously unmissable way. Here, the vision of class stratification is self-evident. This graph talks. Although Leibov's prime interest after the 1960s was linguistic change, it is arguably such displays of sociolinguistic variation that constituted his founding breakthrough. A second pattern of stratification that emerged in New York is shown in figure 7.2. 7.1 is the one I showed you before. This is 7.2. That there is 7. Oh, for crying out loud. That's 7.2 that we're going to talk about now. The graph for the variable R, pronunciation or omission of post-vocalic R in words like card. This graph combines the 10 social levels of the survey into 6 classes and displays all 5 styles. Mostly it shows the same kind of clear, fine stratification as for ing, but there is also a difference. In the 2 most formal styles, the lower middle class considerably outdo their betters, the upper middle class, in the pronunciation of prestige. Why? Leibov describes it as a hypercorrection. In their pursuit of prestige, the class that is just below the most prestigious actually overshoots their model. This became known as the lower middle class crossover effect. The pattern, which also showed out for both the New York vowel variables, is paralleled and illuminated by interviewees' language perceptions, how they evaluated the specific sociolinguistic variables when they heard them. The lower middle class reacted more than any other group to whether R was pronounced or not by other people. Their hypersensitivity reflects linguistic insecurity and matches their extreme style shift, indicating that they are taking the lead in change for variables like R. We return to such sociolinguistic perceptions in chapter 10.3. What is class? So far, we have begged a crucial sociological question. What is class and how do we measure it? Class can be defined as structured inequality between groups. In modern Western societies, it tends to have several characteristics. It is fluid rather than clear-cut, as caste is, at least partly achieved rather than ascribed by birthright, economically based in material possessions, not, for example, racially based, large-scale and impersonal, for example, not located in an individual master-slave relationships. Typically, there is a small upper class and perhaps sizable underclass. In between are the working class, a shrinking group in Western societies, and an expanding and highly diverse middle class. The 2 main sociological theories of class have been Marxist and structuralist functionalist, which was accepted in American social sciences in the mid-20th century. Leibov uses this model and deals with its operationalization in some detail in his thesis. Stratification was seen as measurable through scales based on informants' answers to questions about things like occupation, education, and income in the manner described earlier for the New York survey. This still seems a very common sense way to measure class. We are used to being asked these things in marketing surveys or seeing them reported in opinion polls. Most subsequent Most subsequent major sociolinguistic projects applied similar indexes, not just in the US, but also in countries like the UK, Canada, Brazil, Egypt, Argentina, and Japan. There are, however, issues around the detailed workings of these scales. You want to come here? Hey. You want to come here? Come here. Come here. Okay. Apparently you don't want to come here. We got, hey, Ryan. What's this? Yeah, what's that? Come here. Everybody wants to see you. Come on. Come here. There you go. Look at the camera. Look at the camera. Hey, hey. You're just fine. You're just fine. Just say hi to everybody. Lick me with your lamb long tongue. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Okay. He is a sweet puppy. There are, however, issues around the detailed workings of these scales. Even in some Western societies, they may not apply easily. In New Zealand, we have found it very difficult to sort middle class from working class, let alone distinguish lower from middle from upper subclasses. Nor should we expect to transplant these measures to non-Western nations. However, the results demonstrate that such scales do locate social stratification, if only because the social divisions they identify are gross enough to make them impervious to upset by marginal outlier and contrary cases, or by more subtle sociocultural factors. Prestige and counter-prestige. Why then do class differences manifest themselves in language? Look at the style dimension in figures 7.1 and 7.2. As well as the differentiation between classes, we see the shared pattern of style shifting. The style slope represents the common norm across New York City, which is for Leibov the defining characteristic that makes it a speech community. Recall his definition back in exercise 5.2. All groups, highest and lowest, share similar responses. All acknowledge the one standard for both ing and Small spider running on your arm. I was sitting outside earlier. I don't remember now if it was today or yesterday, and looked down and there was a spider running down my pants. Oh my God. I don't know. I'm sitting outside. I should expect the things, but I didn't. In a sense, then, there is agreement on standardized norms reflected in attitudes and behaviors, but there is also rejection of those standards. The standard pattern raises a question of its own. If all groups have the same evaluations and the same target, in figure 7.1, 0 ing, in figure 7.2, 100% are, why do they not always speak how they want to, or at least how they think they ought to? In their most formal styles, the lower classes approach the highest class's casual style. Why do they not do that all the time so that they sound like the upper middle class in ordinary speech? The reason is that the overt prestige of standard forms like ing is not the whole story. There exists a countervailing set of attitudes which reject the standard and align instead with an oppositional vernacular form, in this case, in for ing. We explore this further in the case study of ing, section 7.6, and examine prestige, covert prestige, and related concepts in chapter 10. Exactly, heebie-jeebies, Dawn. Exactly. Do you know, you guys, I was talking to my youngest yesterday, and do you know what my youngest said to me? They told me that they lurk on my channel sometimes when I am live. So I tell you what, little girl, you lurk all you want. We are happy to have you here. You could say hi occasionally. Lord only knows when she's lurking, when they're lurking. One of the main sociological critiques of the structural functionalist approach is that it treats stratification as if it were neutral, value-free. That results in endorsement of the status quo and inherent conservatism. It assumes consensus within society. But the alternative to consensus is conflict, in line with the social theories of Marx and Weber. This contrasting view comes in the work of John Rickford, a leading scholar of African American English and the Creoles of the Caribbean. In a reflective 1986 publication, Rickford argues that structural... Hey, St. Louis Scientology squirrel. How are you? You are welcome here. Exactly, Sunrise Dawn. We've got a lurker kiddo in my chat. I don't know why they felt the need to tell me that they come and lurk in my chat. Oh, actually, you know what they were telling me? They have my channel running in the background in order to get me watch hours. Isn't that sweet? In a reflective 1986 publication, Rickford argues that structural functionalist scales risk minimizing or overlooking the operation of power, the distribution of wealth and resources, and the role these play in creating and sustaining social disadvantages. Oh, you're so sweet, Kristen. Enjoy your walk. Rickford's doctoral work in his native Guyana, supervised by Leibov, studied the Creole standard continuum of the village of Canewalk near the capital, Georgetown. He saw that an American-style functional scale would not work in this East Indian sugarcane community. It's nice to see you, Lou. How are you doing tonight? Local discourses revealed just two clear-cut cases. Manual laborers on the sugar estates called the estate class, and the others, non-estate. Just two clear-cut classes. The social and economic differences between the two groups were clear-cut and were reflected in a dramatic difference between their Englishes. One was overwhelmingly Creole, the other much closer to the standard English. What's going on in St. Louis today, Lou? Oh, you're Kate, Lou's friend? Well, nice to meet you, Lou. Listen to me. Nice to meet you, Kate. Please forgive me. Sorry, guys, I had to turn on the space heater. It is cooling down quickly, and it feels much cooler than the 75 degrees that my watch says that it is. I do not think that it is that cold. Elron and you were protesting earlier. How did it go? I didn't go downtown to protest today because I'm just tired. You do, Kate? I'm so... It's so nice to have you here. Thank you that you enjoy my content. Protesting takes a lot out of me, too. It's a lot to go out and be out there. It's a lot, and it's a lot of attention, right? Especially if you're live streaming. Because you have to pay attention to the live stream, you have to pay attention to the picture, you have to pay attention to who's coming and going, you have to pay attention to the surroundings around you. It's really hard. It's really hard. It takes a lot of attention. For a set of pronoun alternates, such as basilectical me versus mesiarcholectical I for the first person, their usages were poles apart. 18% standard forms for the... What does EC stand for? For the estate class. 83% for the non-estate class. This was despite the estate class agreeing with the non-estate class in associating the standard language with the highest jobs and Creole with the lowest. The non-estate class members evaluate standard variance as part of getting ahead socially, like the lower middle class New Yorkers for R. Oh my goodness, was there a dog left in the car? That's terrible. Oh, good. Good. That's good to hear. The non-estate class members evaluate standard variance as part of getting ahead socially, like the middle class New Yorkers for R. But the estate class laborers see attempts to better themselves through standard English as making little difference. Linguistic stratification is not a neutral social fact any more than social stratification itself is. Rather, it is reflex always of inequality, usually of disadvantage, and often of exploitation. In earlier chapters, we noted the existence of inequality between majority and minority languages, between established and immigrant languages, between low and high languages and diglossia, between Pidgin Creoles and standard languages. The same stratification operates in monolingual configurations, and its basis, as Guy notes in his overview of class and sociolinguistics, is power, social, economic, and political power. The same stratification operates in monolingual configurations, and its basis is power, social, economic, and political power. Structural functionalism minimizes intergroup conflict, but stresses the opportunity for individuals to compete and rise through the class layers. What it ignores is that a person's life chances are circumscribed, although not dictated by their origins, by the place they inherit in the structure. As Leibov's dedication of his book on African American youth vernacular puts it, to the Jets, the Cobras, and the Thunderbirds, who took on all odds and were dealt all low cards. Leibov's very evident decades-long commitment to sociolinguistic equity comes in spite of rather than because of the social theory he adopted. Alternative views of class and sociolinguistics regard stratification as a process rather than a structure, not something given, but the fruit of ongoing socioeconomic and political force. They have proposed alternative or complementary models for understanding social patterns, 3 in particular: social networks, communities of practice, and the linguistic marketplace. Because of their close association with the mechanisms of language change, we will deal with these in Chapter 8. They all represent attempts to access a more of the cultural lifeblood of class differences in lived out experiences, particularly of those on the social margins. Lori, hi, Lori. Seven point three, ethnicity and language. The sociolinguistic significance of ethnicity is reflected in the many ways it has already surfaced earlier in this book. In Chapter 2, Fishman's focus on ethnicities and their languages in Giles's ethno-linguistic vitality paradigm. The place of ethnic identity and language maintenance in Shift, Chapter 3. The racial dimensions of Pidgin and Creole origins, Chapter 4. The role of shared ethnicity and language choice, Chapter 5. Gumper's research on cross-ethnic misunderstandings, Chapter 6. He's just angry at you for interrupting his nap. That's hilarious, Dawn. Of course he was. And in Chapter 10 and 11, we will see how language ideologies tie in with ethnicity and how language can be used to claim an ethnicity. In this chapter, we concentrate on the study of ethnically related variation within languages, particularly English, where most of the research has been done. Here's an interesting example that they're going to refer back to here pretty quick, I hope. Portuguese is one of the most researched languages using variationist methods. The phrase gente means literally and historically the people. But a study by Ana Ziles in 2005 shows that in Brazilian Portuguese over the past 100 years, a gente has increasingly replaced the traditional first-person plural pronoun nos for we. The same kind of change has gone in French, where the indefinite pronoun on has now nearly replaced the traditional first-person plural nous in everyday speech. These changes affect both the language's pronoun system and its pattern of inflection on verbs. One of the speakers in Zeil's recordings used both nos and gente in this utterance. Ahente seems to have arisen first from speakers of lower social status and then spread to higher classes and remains less used in formal than informal speech. Ziles found that speakers in the large southern Brazilian city of Porto Alegre chose ahente 69% of the time. Using education as a measure of social stratification, the main difference was between those who had only elementary education, 54% ahente, and all those with higher levels of education, 67 to 74%. But as often, stratification interacted with gender. The elementary educated women used about the same level as others, but the men with elementary education used only half as much. Ziles explained this as lower educated men not wanting to use a form associated with women. See the case study of Ing in 7.6 for a similar pattern. I did get to see his spoiled face earlier. I did. He was very spoiled. What is ethnicity? Ethnicity is one of the most slippery social dimensions. It has to do with a group sharing sociocultural characteristics, a sense of place, an ancestry, a common history, religion, cultural practices, ways of communicating, and often a language. When sociolinguists question their informants about ethnicity, they are nowadays most likely to ask what ethnic group a person identifies with, indicating the socially constructed nature of ethnicity. Race involves treating a biological characteristic, such as skin color, as socially significant. But recent history is littered with conflicts in which race determined which side you were on and whether you lived or died, and this heritage still remains with us. The legacy of enslavement of Africans by Europeans underlies the deep racialization of American society, which is one reason for the enormous amount of research undertaken on African American English by both white and black researchers. Harris and Rampton distinguish 4 positions on ethnicity which parallel those identified in the previous chapter for gender. Deficit. Other races are inferior to us. Difference. You are not inferior to us, but you are different. Dominance. Acknowledging that ethnic relations have routinely meant the domination of one group by another, often through imperial power. Discourse. Diversity. The previous 3 categories, ethnic groups and ethnicity itself, are socially constructed and reproduced. Often a theory of difference has involved a de facto stance of deficit, leading in practice to dominance, as, for example, under apartheid in South Africa. Much sociolinguistic work has concentrated on challenging the deficit approach and advocating the acknowledgement of difference and even dominance. It has been concerned to address the difficult questions of ethnic disadvantage, although sometimes working with quite simplistic definitions of ethnicity. More recent research has tended to problematize this, stressing that ethnicities are fluid and language is not just a correlate or product of ethnicity, but also a component of it. This same deconstruction deconstructive trend in the social sciences applies also to gender and other categories. Defining ethnicity. Do you see a difference between race and ethnicity? What does your answer mean for language and society and for research on language and ethnicity? In his essay, Language, Ethnicity, and Racism, Fishman characterizes this ethnicity as collective intergenerational cultural continuity and suggests these as central questions. Who are we? From where do we come? What is special about us? Answer these questions in relation to your own ethnic affiliations. Then consider the questions themselves. What definition of ethnicity do they imply? The ethnicity language interface. Why, there's a lot of you here. Yes. Consider the sociolinguistic implications of the four stances toward ethnic relations listed in the text. Deficit, difference, dominance, and discourse. What different kinds of language behaviors, policies, and research would these different views result in? Think of ethnic minority groups in your own country. Which of the four approaches in question 3 characterizes the way they are actually treated by other minorities, by the majority, and by the state? What role does their language or variety play in these attitudes and behaviors? Yes, she did. I can believe that, Sunrise Dawn. Okay. Majority groups often do not perceive themselves as ethnicities. They are just the default against which others' differences are defined. The home page of the New Zealand government's Office of Ethnic Affairs states, "The Office of Ethnic Affairs is focused on people whose culture and traditions distinguish them from the majority in New Zealand. This website celebrates New Zealand and its ethnic communities. Ethnic people and their families are part of New Zealand's national identity and support our nation's economic transformation." I am studying sociolinguistics, Lori. As we found in Chapter 3 on language maintenance, many minority ethnicities see language as a core part of their identity. Some theorists, most obviously Fishman, agree. In this chapter, we are concerned not with the heritage languages of minorities, but rather with the effect these languages have had on the minority's variation of the dominant language. We find two main kinds of sociolinguistic situations behind ethnic variations. Just a moment, y'all. How the dog has managed to get himself tangled, I'm not quite sure, but he has. And so we have to disentangle him. I found this on the web. In this chapter, we are concerned with not with the heritage languages of minorities, but rather with the effect those languages have had on the minority's variety of the dominant language. We find two main kinds of sociolinguistic situations behind ethnic variation, both resulting from migrations and usually the fruit of colonization or globalization. When an indigenous group is outnumbered, or at least outgunned, by a colonizing majority, they will, in due course, usually start to adopt the majority's language. Their variety of that language will bear traces of the differences between it and their own language. Here, the indigenous language is called the substrate, as in Pidgin Creole studies, see Chapter 4. This is the situation for the First Nations of Canada and Maori of New Zealand. That was Siri. Siri knows how he got tangled. Actually, she gave me some New Yorker article about how I became a vet. No rush, Red. You're good. When immigrants arrive in a new nation with a different language, their descendants will quickly shift to adopt the majority language. Their own language is termed the adstrate, which affects the way they speak the majority language. This is the situation of Korean immigrants living in Australia or Moroccans in the Netherlands. In both these situations, the ad substrate may produce a variety of the majority language that is hearably different from the mainstream version. A few of the differentiating features may be unique to the minority's variety, but most differ in frequency only. Researchers may call such a variety an ethnolect and give it a name such as African American Vernacular English. A third situation involves a variety that is so radically different from the standard and has a distinctive history that it is different in kind. A Creole language and its former colonizing lexifier language might blend in a post-Creole continuum, as with Caribbean Englishes. What's funny, Don? Ethnic varieties of English. African American Vernacular English. It was the background of problematic race relations and disadvantage among urban African Americans that triggered the first sociolinguistic projects after Leibov's New York study. Leibov himself led a project from the end of the 60s, which often researched 3 New York adolescent groups. This was an innovative ethnographic study where 2 white linguists collaborated with 2 local black field workers. The outcomes were significant, published in Leibov 1972. Description of black youth rhetorical styles, especially in the use of ritual insults. Your mother's so old she got spider webs under her arms. I like that one. Your mother's so old she got spider webs under her arms. Ah, that's what you were laughing at. Yeah, that is funny. See, you guys, I lose it at the drop of a hat. It's seriously a problem. Study of the structure of conventional stories, seeding what became the foundational framework for narrative analysis and sociolinguistics. And most sociopolitically significant, the conclusion that inner city ethnic vernaculars were not illogical substandard linguistic codes, but had their own systematicity. The Logic of Non-Standard English, as Leibov's title went in a seminal paper in 1972. Hundreds of studies and thousands of publications later, we now know more about African American Vernacular English than any other variety on the planet. An irony considering its continuing stigmatized status. Its features have been comprehensively analyzed and quantified, including on a wide range of socio-demographic dimensions, Regional differences throughout the U.S., isolated relict communities, individual case studies of young and old, contrast between women and men, between middle and working class, and the developmental paths of African American children. Since the 1970s, successive generations of African American sociolinguists have taken the lead in much of this research, and the labeling has shifted with the times from non-standard Negro English through Black English vernacular to African American vernacular English since circa 1990. In the 80s and the 90s, the repercussions of sociolinguistic findings on African American vernacular English came into the public arena through three main controversies. After I ace this, will you apply your... No, I'm going a new path. I have been a stay-at-home mom, and I am going to be an English teacher. Sociolinguists, three major controversies. Sociolinguists testified as expert witnesses in the 1979 Ann Arbor case in Michigan, supporting the right of African American students to be taught language through their own vernacular. The case, it is Ebonics. It's what African American English was termed Ebonics, but it's actually African American vernacular English, but people called it Ebonics. The Black-White English Divergent Hypotheses in 1986. Labov, the Black-White English Divergence Hypotheses. In 1986, Labov published a study with Wendell Harris which claimed inner-city black and white vernaculars were diverging and that this reflected and strengthened social division. This interpretation was widely publicized and debated, supported by some researchers and challenged by others. Oh, thank you guys. You're so sweet. In 1996, the Oakland School Board in California authorized African American vernacular English as a language teaching medium in their schools. Here you go, Sunrise Dawn. Language teaching medium in their schools, sparking controversy about, quote, Ebonics, which is African American vernacular English. Many sociolinguists were called on to take public positions and explain the character and structure of African American vernacular English, and the Linguistic Society of America immediately passed a resolution to support. The question of the origins of African American vernacular English has triggered a vast amount of research into it in its own right, with positions often polarized linguistically and politically, between a Creole origins hypothesis and an Anglicist theory that African American vernacular English developed from the input British dialects and parallel to white varieties. With positions often polarized linguistically and politically, between a Creole origins hypothesis and an Anglicist theory that AAVE developed from the input British dialects and parallel white varieties. I remember when that happened too, Sunrise Dawn. Ethnic varieties in English is worldwide. Next section is gender in language. Get ready, ladies. The quantitative variationist teaching techniques pioneered by Labov, especially the sociolinguistic variable, are ideal for identifying the relative differences which are the main markers of ethnic varieties of languages. Such research has spread around the world over the past 40 years, most of it on English and much of that on ethnic variation. Some examples. Lumbee Indian English, North Carolina. The Lumbee are an unusual group of Native Americans. They've spoken English for well over 200 years, but no one knows why they acquired that language so early and from whom. Nor does their current variety retain any hints on what the group's ancestral languages may have been. Because of this unclear ethno-linguistic history, they have in fact had some trouble convincing authorities that they are an ethnic group at all. Walt Wolfram and colleagues' study of Lumbee English show that the group have forms and function of the verb to be that are relics of earlier British dialect forms. These have receded in other local varieties, but have been retained by the Lumbee, with the result that they serve as an ethno-linguistic marker in their speech. Oh, Lori, I'm probably just passing over words that I should look up. I have a bad habit of doing that. Maori English, New Zealand. Until circa 1990, New Zealand linguists had not managed to establish that a Maori English existed, let alone described its features, despite most New Zealanders believing they could hear it. This was probably because we were looking for absolute differences from general New Zealander English. But when we started to search for relative differences, we found that Maori and Pakeha use the same features but at different frequencies. Taken together, a cluster of intonations, morphological and syntactic forms, and especially phonological differences, made for a hearably different variety of English. For example, New Zealand English has a very centralized schwa pronunciation for the short I vowel known as the kit vowel, in which the word represents. But some Maori uses a close front variant of kit that sounds more like British received pronunciation or Australian than mainstream New Zealand English. In our study in Porirua, near Wellington, there were 5 Maori people who used this pronunciation. These were also the sample's only fluent speakers of Maori, which has a close front pronunciation of short I. The 5 speakers' Maori language influenced their English pronunciation, a substrate effect that created this distinctive ethnic feature. Yes, I am saying I need to word clear. That's probably, have you guys caught me yawning so much? That's probably why I'm yawning so much. Because I need to do some word clearing. You want to see my pretty ceiling? Look at my pretty ceiling with all my lights. It's going to get late enough, maybe we'll be able to go out and see the Northern Lights if we're on here long enough. Italian Australian English. Not all heritage languages produce persistent traces in an immigrant group's dialect. In Barbara Horvath's research on the vowels of English in Sydney, Australia, she found that most of the Greek and Italian adults, the first-generation immigrants, had a broad ethnic accent influenced by their first language, with quite different vowels from the core of the Sydney community. But the next generation, the teenagers, used even more native vowels than the natives. Why? They appear to have been distancing themselves from their parents' ethnically marked L2 English. They did not want a stigmatized accent like their parents. Lebov had found the same thing for Jewish and Italian descendants in New York. Psychologically, this anti-ad straight shift fits with the tendency we noted in Chapter 3 for second-generation immigrant children to reject their heritage first language. Yontech, exactly. Gender in language. Here we go, ladies. Almost done. We can do it. Gender is a major influence on language choice. In the languages of Western societies, difference between women's and men's speech are mostly matters of degree, but there are communities where wives and husbands do not even speak the same language to each other. This is an extreme case, but many languages have alternative forms or features used only by women or men. Oh, I'm sorry, Lori. It is clear as can be, so we shall see what the north sky shows. Gender is a major influence on language choice. In the I already said all this. The lexicon holds the most obvious differences, with taboo words forbidden or at least disfavored for women. In some societies, the names of male in-laws are taboo to women, and so are any words that sound like these names. But there do not appear to be any societies with parallel restrictions on men. The grammar of some languages may encode male-female speaker differences. In Yaniuwa, from the Northern Territory of Australia, women and men speak different dialects. They use the same vocabulary but apply different sets of grammatical affixes to the base words. Yaniuwa boys face a challenge growing up. They are raised by the women, so they learn the female dialect and therefore have to shift to the men's dialect at puberty. One man narrated, "When I spoke like a woman, my father said to me, 'Where are your breasts and woman's parts?' I was really shamed. I was very careful for a while after that to speak the men's words." Gender often forms the most salient dimension of sociolinguistic variation in a community. On the basis of research findings from the New York City study onwards, you have an Aurora alert? That's cool, Lori. Labov has proposed the general linguistic conformity of women as one of several principles of sociolinguistic structure. For stable sociolinguistic variables, women show a lower rate of stigmatized variance and a higher rate of prestige variance than men. He surveys studies not only from many varieties of English, but from Canadian French and Spanish in Latin America and Europe. For example, 9 out of 10 variables researched in Detroit English show that women used more standard forms than men. This pattern holds for the most stable English variable of all, ing. See the case study in the next section. Gender is usually a major factor in the usage of sociolinguistic variables that are unstable, that is, changing. Cajun English is the ethnic variety used by originally French-speaking communities in rural Louisiana. Its pronunciation is influenced by the French language lack of aspiration on the stops p, t, and k. Cajun English tends not to aspirate these stops, pronouncing them p, t, k, rather than the standard English p, t, k. I'm probably not doing that right. Figure 7.3 shows the 3 age groups of Cajun English speakers, and in every case, men use more Cajun-style, unaspirated stops than women. The gender difference is quite small for the older generation, about 15%, but widens markedly for middle-aged and young. The research explains the shift. See, Word clearing. See, the researchers explain the shift for the middle-aged women as a reflection of girls spending longer at English language school than boys. The maintenance of non-aspiration by the youngest men comes from their greater involvement in the late 20th century renaissance of Cajun culture. Note how social dimensions intertwine here, region with ethnicity, ethnicity with gender, and gender with age. The age differences reflect change in progress, the subject of the next chapter. And there is also a class reflex, since Cajuns and their language have been marginalized. Many studies show women and men from the same class differing radically in their use of the same sociolinguistic variable. In early research, the most common explanation for women's use of more standard forms was that they are more inclined than men to seek prestige through language. Women are more status conscious and therefore use more standard forms. This was a difference or even deficit interpretation in the terms introduced in Chapter 6-7. Eckert reviews the evidence on this and agrees that women are using language as a symbolic means to assert themselves, but she suggests a dominance interpretation. Women are more status-bound than men. Deprived of power, women must satisfy themselves with status. Cheshire challenges the principle of women's conformity itself on two main grounds. Okay, Lori. I hope everything's okay. See you soon. Take care. Challenges the principle of women's conformity on two main grounds. The findings are a reflection of the methods used to reach them, especially in the construction of social class, most obviously in the assignment of women to a class on the basis of their husband's positioning. The definition of what is standard is notoriously slippery and variable. See Chapter 10.5. The gender patterning of language has repercussions for men as well as women, for masculinity as well as femininity, as the case study of Ing to which we now turn will show. Chapter 11.4 returns to the issue of gender and how it can be performed linguistically. The case of ing. That mosquito was as big as a house, y'all. I don't have any DEET out here. The alternation between ing and in the suffix of walking, which we touched on in the New York City study, is one of the most widely salient sociolinguistic variables of English. Dropping the G marks social or formality levels in all Englishes, although there is no phonetic G involved. It is a choice between a standard velar pronunciation, ing, for the nasal versus a non-standard alveolar apical, n. As a variable, ing is also very stable. There is no evidence anywhere of significant change in its frequency or usage. For these reasons, it is also the most researched variable in English. Here I bring together several different approaches to ing from research around the world in the past 60 years. The dates used are for publication of studies which were often conducted several years early. New England, USA, 1958. The first quantitative research on Ing was undertaken in 1954. While making recordings for an educational research project in a New England village, Fisher noticed and calculated variation in children's Ing usage. His conclusion was that their alternations correlated with sex, class, personality, mood, formality, and the specific verb used. Fisher also quantified individual behavior of one pair of students, a well-behaved model boy and a mischievous typical boy. Despite the slightly bizarre labelings to whose social meanings we return later, there is a clear difference between one boy's near total Ing pronunciation and the other's mix of both forms. Fisher also found that the model boy showed a clear ability to shift his style to suit different situations. Here's, throw the book on the floor. Let's try again. There's those tables, guys, in case you want them. The study thus touched on both the dimensions that Labov would certain research in New York, differences between socially different speakers, and stylistic differences within the speech of the same speaker. Fisher's study is cited frequently for its pioneering status, particularly by Labov, despite being very slight, but he did also outline a prophetic, wider program for researching variation and change. New York's Dawn, I'll be teaching adults is my plan. I can't teach children in the States. So I can't teach at elementary schools or secondary schools. Unless maybe if it's a private school, but mostly adults. Mostly adults. Labov's New York study outlined earlier in 7.1 was the major founding analysis of Ing. Look back at figure 7.1, which displays his findings for class by style stratification, interpreted there in the adjacent text. In the following 2 decades, Ing was researched in small and large studies of English varieties all around the world, including Los Angeles, Yorkshire, and Australia. Norwich, England, 1974. A few years after the New York study, the British sociolinguistic Peter Trudgill surveyed the English of Norwich, deriving his methodology from Labov, with a division into 5 social classes and 4 styles. His results showed that Ing was also socially stratified in this British dialect, and that in was typical of males as well as working class speakers. Men tended to use more in and women more ing, and this pattern held for most of the 20 linguistic variables he examined. This was also the finding of many other early quantitative studies of stable linguistic variables, leading to Labov's principle of the linguistic conformity of women mentioned earlier. Trudgill explains the association of working class speech with toughness and masculinity as covert prestige. Yeah, college age and English is a second language. Folks who are immigrants, folks who are refugees. I volunteer right now and I'm teaching English to a group of Ukrainian and Syrian women. That's good, Lori. That was quick. Trudgill explains the association of working class speech with toughness and masculinity as covert prestige, a positive but hidden evaluation of non-standard pronunciation. This is concealed from general social display, but surfaces in the claim by most Norwich men to be using more standard forms than they actually do, while women profess the opposite. Trudgill's explanation for women's behavior on ing was one that has in part been overtaken by social change and was critiqued by some feminist sociolinguists. The table offers an exercise in interpreting quantitative data. What are the relationships between gender classes and styles in the table? Graphing selections from the table on the grid will help show the relationships. Graph men or women only or each class separately. It's an interesting table, you guys. Yes, I can show you the table. I can, if I get my finger off it. And I figure out what direction to point things. There you go. There you go. Okay, we are almost done, y'all. And then we can chit-chat a little bit. What do y'all want to chit-chat about tonight? Anything in particular? We want to wait for the sun go down and see if we find, I don't know, which direction. Do we have to look in the northern sky for the northern lights? Or are they everywhere, y'all? How do we find the northern lights? I'm surrounded by a bunch of trees. Do we look at the sunset? What do we do? How do we find the northern lights, y'all? Most of the studies of ing through to circa 1990 were community-wide projects modeled on New York City and its methods, and most of those, except in fact in New York, have shown that men use the alveolar variant in more than do women. As variation work has matured, researchers have begun to go deeper into the operation and social significance of variables such as ing in particular groups. Look north. It's pretty cool. They're a really nice group of women. And one just had a baby today. Look north. I have to look north for the northern lights. That's funny. Well, we're on the south side of the house right now, guys. We're out back, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to take you. I don't know. We'll see. Try. One such study is Scott Kiesling's research on the role of in marking masculinity at a U.S. college fraternity group. No, it didn't sound cheeky, Lori. I didn't take it that way. I hope I didn't give you that impression. You were fine. I was just like, of course, Northern Lights, north. That's what I need to do. It should be self-explanatory. It was kind of a silly question. Kiesling's study is typical of more recent variationist work in targeting a specific, cohesive social group rather than a whole community, in recording natural discourse as it occurs within the group, and in complementing quantification with qualitative analysis of how a variable functions online in stretches of talk. The apparently simple demographic category of biological sex has also shifted to gender as a social construct that speakers do rather than are. And where social prestige was a key concept in Labov and Treadgill, in Keesley's study, power is central. In fraternity meetings, ing use related to power. 3 fraternity members almost always used in during meetings, while the rest shifted to a much lower level of in than when they were just socializing casually. Kiesling concludes that these 3 are indexing an image of hard work, physicality, and working class vernacular power. Working class men need to demonstrate physical power because of their lack of economic power. This focuses particularly in the expletive fucking, rhetorically powerful because of its taboo value, and almost always pronounced with in, not ing. In this excerpt, fucking and other in pronunciations cluster in meeting speech from Mick. I swear to God, fucking every semester, all we have to do is sit around and argue about money, money, money. And I'm not going to pay this fucking money, all right? Yeah, you guys sitting back. I know you guys are thinking I'm going to pay this fucking money just because I have money. I'll tell you what, I ain't going to pay a fucking thing, all right? Note that, as well as the tokens Kiesling marks, there are several occurrences of gonna. In a style contrasting to Mick's, Mack, a very senior fraternity group member, speaks from a position of recognized structural authority within the group, lays down the law about how things shall be done, and uses very little in. Linguistic variables such as ing, then, are not simple reflections of social categories, but are resources that speakers can use strategically to their own ends in particular interactions. In Chapter 10.3, we will touch on ing again as an example not of production, but of listener perception and attitudes towards a variable. End of chapter, guys. Less than 2 hours. That's amazing. Now, to determine whether I can answer any of the questions that she's given us, I am just... Okay, let's read the summary. Labov's pioneering project in the social stratification of English in New York City is the foundational study of variationist social linguistics. His interviews with 122 speakers on the Lower East Side elicited 5 styles reflecting increasing levels of attention to speech. The sociolinguistic variables he analyzed include the stable alternation of the ing variable between in and ing, as in walking. The speech different social classes was clearly stratified, and all styles shifted in the same direction from casual to most formal speech. For some variables, such as R, the lower middle class crossed over the upper in their pursuit of prestige. I do too, Sunrise. I always have to orient myself to some direction that I know. Like right now, I know that that is southwest because the sun is setting over there. So if that's southwest, then that's west, which makes this north. Labov's variationist approach became dominant in North America and has been used with a wide variety of languages around the world. This chapter has covered variation according to class, ethnicity, and gender. Class was operationalized in Leibov's work through indexes of occupation, education, income, etc. Most major sociolinguistic surveys follow this kind of structural functionalist model, which implies a consensus of all classes agreeing on their evaluation of sociolinguistic differences. Opposing vernacular norms also pull speakers toward non-standard forms. This is better explained in the alternative conflict theory of class associated with Marx. Linguistic and social stratification involve inequality and disadvantage. The conflict approach fitted the structures and conditions in Rickford's study of a sugarcane village in Guyana. Ethnicity involves a group's shared sociocultural characteristics. In ethnolinguistic variation, a minority group speaks a distinctive variety of the dominant language because influenced from features of their heritage language. Such differences are usually matters of degree rather than absolutes. African American vernacular English has been the most researched of all language varieties since studies of inner-city youth in the 60s. Continuing research has detailed the linguistic features and social significance of AAVE, disputed its origins, and contributed to public debate on its relation to educational disadvantage. Ethnic varieties of English have been researched in many countries, including Australia, the United States, and New Zealand. Yep, I have to do the same thing, sunrise, dawn. That's north, the sun sets over that mountain, so that's west. The sunrise is over here. Yep. Gender is a major influence on language choice. Although there are communities where women and men use different varieties or forms, usually gender differences are a matter of degree. Leibov proposed the generalization that women use more prestige variants of a stable sociolinguistic variable. One explanation is that women are more status conscious than men, but others argue that they are more bound to status because of their lack of power. Gender interacts with other social dimensions like ethnicity, class, and age, as in the Cajun English of Louisiana. You have the Aurora app. Currently, I have a very small chance of seeing them. I looked on the map. We have 13%, but we have too much smoke. It's still early. Sometimes the northern lights are best at 2 a.m. Oh, shit. All the forecasts I read said, well, Portland. Portland, Lori. There's an Aurora app. Aurora forecast. My Aurora forecast. Aurora forecast. Aurora alert. Northern lights. Aurora now. Which one? They all offer in-app purchases. Which one? The sunrise dawn is from North Georgia. North Georgia? Come on, she says it every time. How'd I forget that? North Georgia. I was right. North Georgia. She's from North Georgia. Which app? There's like 16. It just says Aurora, huh? Just says Aurora. Aurora. Well, I'm going to get the one that doesn't have in-app purchases. How about that? Reese is going to be so much closer to you. Sunrise Dawn. Canada looks like a good place to be. Yes, Reese is moving. Reese is moving. Oh, I don't like that one. Okay, Lori. There's a bunch that just don't have very many reviews. The one I downloaded seems weird. Yeah, I don't know what this all means. I just know it says no good chance. Slightly better tomorrow night. But I can't stay up that late tomorrow night. So let's cross our fingers for tonight. Okay, guys. This has been just lovely. As always, I should have done this first thing this morning and gotten the reading out of the way. I will remember that for the future. I see, Lori. Thank you. Yep, that's the one I downloaded. Just exactly like that one. Looks just like it. Okay, good. Hey, Robert, how are you? We were just getting ready to take off. But it is good to see you. It is good to see you. Did you get a chance? Did you get a chance to see the Northern Lights, Robert? Did they get down south far enough to you? I've had pictures and all the stuff that everybody's seen all last night all over my Facebook today. So I hope you got to see them. We are up late. I had a really hard time getting to work on my homework today. I don't know what anti-motivation pills. Not a good view from there. Okay. I don't know what anti-motivation pills I'm taking, but I'll tell you what. Everybody says I just need to focus and motivate myself, but the avoidance is strong. The avoidance is strong. Yeah, thank you, Robert. Maybe it's just that. It always gives me the creeps. I have a terrible time. I will be so glad when I'm done with this, guys, but it's a whole nother year. I can't. I'm so looking forward to the summer. I was talking to my daughter about something today, and I said, oh, I know what it was. She was talking about maybe getting plugs in her ears. And I asked her, please, not to get plugs in their ears because they give me the heebie jeebies. They just give me the heebie jeebies. I don't know what it is about plugged ears. And it's not that I think they're bad or awful or people shouldn't have them. Good night, Robert. Thank you for the Mother's Day wishes. Yeah, I don't know. They I've got a young man who's sitting next to me in my class. It's a lovely young man. I really like. And I mean, I'll get over it. It's not like he's going to know or anything. But they do just give me the heebie jeebies. Yeah, that's the one my youngest says they want. But I can't argue with the reason they want it. It's because it's invisible. If they take it out, it's a completely invisible. No, it leaves no mark that anybody can see. So it is not my favorite, but I can't easily argue with their commentary that it's non-visible. It's a non-visible piercing. So if you are lurking, daughter dear, that's my opinion on that. And with that, guys, unless there's anything you want to deeply discuss or anything that's going on anywhere, it is late. It is really late. Who is even live at this hour? Not that we have enough people to even do a room raid. Only people in LA. Only. Orion, come here. Jay's live? Okay. Sleep well. Thanks for hanging out with us too, Lori. You're there till 5 a.m.? I don't know how you do what you do, girl. When do you sleep? Your oldest daughter was born with a mark on her ear that made it look like it had been pierced before? That's interesting. Mountain time. 5 a.m. Mountain time. Okay. You're saving for Europe. Well, that's worth it, but when do you sleep? Happy Mother's Day, Sunrise Dawn. Happy Mother's Day to everybody. I'm gonna call this a night, y'all. Sleeping is for wussies. There you go. You can sleep when you're dead, huh? Okay. So long as you're taking care of yourself. Don't let yourself get too strung out. It's easy to do. You sleep 6 to noon? Okay. Okay. Thank you, guys. And I'll see you later. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.